This is the Breaker.news podcast for the week of October 15th, 2023. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of the Breaker.news and host of the Breaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 312. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker, and my guests on the Big Deal feature for the MMA panel. I welcome back Mario Canseco of ResearchCo and Andy Yan of the Simon Fraser University City Program for their quarterly report card on politics. Is it just me, or were you also disgusted and angered at the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks on civilians in Israel, the scenes of kidnappings and murders at a music festival on the Sabbath? Were you also disgusted and angered to see people protest in Canada in support of Hamas? The Canadian government has outlawed Hamas as a terrorist group, yet the sycophantic followers of Hamas call them freedom fighters. There is one word to describe those who support terrorism, and that word is un-Canadian. Terrorism is terrorism, whether it's Hamas killing innocent Jews, the Sikh separatists who bombed an Air India jet in 1985, or the 30 years of troubles in Northern Ireland between Catholic and Protestant militias. The innocent victims are caught in the middle, and when they're gone, that leaves a hole in the lives of their loved ones and their communities. What Hamas did October 7th delayed and maybe even dashed any hopes of peace in the Middle East for another generation, maybe two. The world is already a dangerous place enough, with Russia's war on Ukraine and China's threat to invade Taiwan. Nobody needed this. What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast. It's time again for the MMA panel. It's the third quarter edition of the MMA panel featuring me, Mackin, M, the other M, Mario, as in Mario Canseco, the president of ResearchCo, and the A is Andy, as in Andy Yan, the director of the City Program at Simon Fraser University, the Duke of Data. Here we are again, one quarter to go. What a crazy summer that was. Not a good summer for Justin Trudeau. A very good summer for Pierre Poilievre and his new look. No glasses. He was very casual going across the country. Of course, Justin Trudeau and wife Sophie split up. Justin went to the movies. He still has Jagmeet Singh to keep him in power. I don't think they went to the movies. But here we are in the fall of 2023, and the world got more dangerous. The Chinese government interference public inquiry was finally announced, but that was quickly overshadowed with this new diplomatic Cold War with India over the Niger assassination in Surrey. Then Vladimir Zelensky from Ukraine came to Ottawa, but that was overshadowed by the Yaroslav Hunka scandal when they gave a standing ovation in Parliament to someone who fought in World War II under the Nazis. Then the world was shocked by the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel during our Thanksgiving weekend, during Jewish high holidays, a shocking turn of events there, and a new war in the Middle East. The world is changing, and who knows what it'll be like next week. But here we are, economic headwinds, inflation and interest rates continue, and all of this whole chaos that's happening internationally and with geopolitics has actually derailed what Justin Trudeau was trying to do, which was trying to, maybe a little bit too little too late, to get a housing strategy, an affordable housing strategy, because that is the number one issue coast to coast to coast. And of course, Andy, you are someone that has a keen interest in that area. What do you think of the way that Trudeau tried to get on this train finally and then was derailed by other events?
Well, it's derailed by global and national events, and it's the fact that if it's really about interest rates, and it's really how we've effectively, certainly in the metropolitan Vancouver, been addicted to being a generation of low interest rates, addicted to those low interest rates, that we're now seeing the shocks. And we're now seeing the shocks kind of resonate through both the ownership and the rental markets, through which it's extremely challenging in terms of finance, in terms of getting projects off the ground now, that I think that this has derailed almost not only the federal, but also the provincial and the municipal ideas of where housing could go. And I think that this is really going to be something that will probably carry on for a fair amount of time.
And Mario Canseco, Trudeau really is playing catch up because Pierre Poilievre really seized this issue. Of course, his slogan is "Bring Home," which he adapts to various issues, but bring home housing affordability, increasing density. That has been a central plank of Poilievre and his already underway campaign. Where do you think this is going? Do you think that Pierre Poilievre will be able to keep the support he's gained, generate more donations, and bring people who were Liberal voters in 2021 and even people who were NDP voters in 2021 under a big Conservative tent? Can he be moderate enough to win?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, we've seen them climb the charts in Ontario, also do very well in BC. We asked a question related to a possible merger of the Liberals and the NDP, and it didn't make a dent in the Conservative lead. So this really speaks about the situation that they find themselves in, particularly with the younger generation. I think what's really striking about the findings recently is you see a lot of people 18 to 34 looking at the Conservatives as an option. And this could be definitely detrimental to the Liberals and the NDP here in BC, because you know that there are certain aspects, certain areas of BC that vote Conservative. We know that they dominate in the rural areas. But if you have a Conservative candidate that is connecting with the urban voter, this could be terrible for the Liberal Party. We know that they're based in the urban areas. We know that they do well here. And it could be reminiscent of 2011 in a way, when Michael Ignatieff only got 13% of the vote here. So if they continue with the same path, it could work. Now, one thing that is important also is whether people, especially voters over 55, are going to look at Pierre Poilievre as somebody who could manage things internationally. And the problem for Trudeau has been they score one and then they drop a couple of goals very quickly. So they haven't really had momentum on this file. If we start to have a situation in the next 6 or 7 months where Poilievre is seen as somebody who can handle foreign policy, it's going to be very difficult for the Liberals to come back.
Ripple effect of Pierre Poilievre and his momentum has been felt in BC, where the Conservative Party of BC under John Rustad, the former BC Liberal, has seen some momentum there. The party, because of Bruce Banman crossing the floor, the Abbotsford South MLA crossing the floor from Kevin Falcon's BC United to John Rustad's BC Conservatives, is that the BC Conservatives now have 2 people, and that's enough for official party status. They get funding, they get question period questions, and then they'll get a podium at the debate when the election happens. Do you think that there's enough momentum there as well? I mean, this party is definitely more rural, but if they're to ride on the coattails of Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, which is a different Conservative party, they're not the same party. Do you think that with the election coming a year from now, possibly spring if David Eby goes sooner, if the Conservatives could become the next opposition party in BC?
Is this a party that can run a campaign in the entire province? And this hasn't really been answered. You know, we don't know if they're going to have candidates everywhere, if they have the organizational capabilities to run a full slate, because their predecessors haven't been able to do so. 6 months ago, a year ago, we were thinking, who is going to run for BC United with Kevin Falcon? And we looked at specific councillors in Vancouver, specific councillors in Surrey. Those conversations have dried up. One of the reasons is that BC United is still a question mark for many voters. You know, to find yourself tied for second place statistically with the BC Conservatives is very, very complicated for Kevin Falcon. But I think part of the essence here is who is going to be attractive enough to get that voter who is willing to seek a seat in the legislature. You know, there might be some conversations between BC United and the BC Conservatives with several people, and they are going to have to be the ones to make the choice of running Conservative or running united. And this is going to be what really separates the BC Conservatives of today from those in the past. Can you find those salt-of-the-earth candidates similar to the one that they ran in Juan de Fuca, and avoid the type of candidate that they run in Vancouver East? That is going to be their challenge.
Probably just enough to split the vote. And I think that that's really going to be, I think the challenge is that whether this is just enough to split the center or the right vote in British Columbia. And I think similarly, it's also, I think, how dependent upon how much the NDP, I think, just kind of keeps the vote on an even keel. I think that this is also part of it, is the fact that I think the NDP so far has kind of kept a relative even keel, that the BC United or the BC Conservatives just hasn't been able to dislodge.
Now, Andy, on the other side of the spectrum, though, there are the BC Greens, and they have diversified in many ways. They're not just the environmental party. They're not the single issue anymore. They are focusing on healthcare, and that is the weak issue of the NDP, because we continue to see hospitals, especially in rural areas, also on Vancouver Island and some green strongholds, have overnight closures, weekend closures, diversion of paramedics and ambulances. People still don't have, too many people still don't have a family doctor, even though the NDP has taken steps forward. There are still a lot of people with a lot of complaints about the healthcare system in BC. And of course, earlier this year, we saw that the NDP decided to start to send cancer patients down to private clinics down in Bellingham. So do you think that the Greens have a chance to close the gap and maybe score a few wins against the NDP this time next year or in the spring on the issue of healthcare?
It's an interesting question, because it really highlights the kind of challenges of governance in British Columbia, that we are a really, really big province. And really the issues of, say, a place like East Vancouver is going to be, I think, different from the challenge in terms of a riding in, say, on the island. And what you can come out with in terms of solutions that are based in a kind of urban area like Vancouver is going to be very different from what you can do in the island, much less up north. And I think that this is really the interesting aspect of BC politics, is really how it's not only, say, an ideological split, but it's really about a regional one, and really how increasingly the regions are somewhat more stable than really what's happening outside of these kind of core urban areas, and how the kind of political, I think, organization may not be just along ideological, but it's along kind of a regional basis.
And looking civically, the two biggest cities in the province, Vancouver and Surrey, both have issues with police. In Vancouver, the Vancouver police have said that they've, in the last year, hired 100 police officers, which is ticking a box on the promises from the 2022 election for Ken Sim and his ABC party. Of course, they won the landslide, sweeping Kennedy Stewart out of office and sweeping super majorities for ABC in on council, park board, and school board. They haven't been so lucky in hiring nurses, though, of course. But apart from sweeping people off the streets of the downtown east side back in April, this council really is trying to make its mark in housing and to please the developers. It's very pro-development. Where do you think that this council has succeeded and failed in its first 12 months? Andy, first you.
Well, I think that getting the multiplex rezoning in Vancouver is, I think, something that is an accomplishment. Now, the question is really how many of those new units will come in online and at what kind of rate of change. I think that what's interesting is that even just today, they talk about how they're making building faster in Vancouver. And the problem in Vancouver isn't necessarily one of building faster. It's building units that are affordable, and that are affordable on local incomes. The policy that was designed to ensure a level of middle income rentals actually had to change the goal lines, just simply because it was so difficult to build for renters, for middle income renters. And I think that this is is one of the kind of big challenges ahead of us. Isn't necessarily just process, through which I think that, going into other announcements around the digitization of permitting, that is something that is really coming into order. But then also these profound challenges in terms of just focusing on really big developments. And it's seemingly, the 6 developers that are going to benefit from a view cones review or a shadows review or a size of floor plate review is really not necessarily going to create the housing that local Vancouverites so desperately need. And I think that this is really going to be a major challenge for this council because of the fact that housing takes a long time, and you're assuming that we're going to build like we built in Vancouver in the 1990s, and it's just simply the land in that type of land format is just not available anymore. And whichever party is able to adapt to public policy to develop, I think, housing that is affordable on local incomes is pretty much going to be the one that I think could be very successful moving forward at every level of government.
How do you measure the ABC administration under Ken Sim, the business casual mayor, the mayor that wants to bring more swagger to the city?
I think on the crime and public safety issue, it's been mixed. We continue to see people who have businesses who are complaining about the situation the same way they were complaining a year and a half ago. I don't think they've really cracked that nut. It's complicated as well for the housing file because they may not have enough time to cut ribbons before the next election. It's an issue that's going to take significantly more time to manage. But in a way, what we saw with the recent announcement by the council and the mayor, it's kind of like a return to the campaign mode. Let's call it the campaign mode. Here I am, everybody's happy. We're so excited. We're so happy to be here. It's different from the type of situation that we've seen over the past few weeks. And the one thing where I think they have been immensely successful, albeit accidentally, is in singling out Christine Boyle as the probable councillor who would run against Ken Sim in the next election. The fact that she's been targeted for things that she said in camera or not, I think that definitely plays a role in the way people are feeling about this.
It's really actually on the fact that Christine was in one way challenged in terms of her concerns around living wage is actually how much of that living wage was dealing around security guards that the city of Vancouver employs, and really how they're not very well compensated. That really, I think the ongoing issues around crime and safety, I think, are still ongoing. One also has to remember that the Vancouver Economic Commission has been disbanded. And now the question is, what are you going to replace it with? That every other city in North America has an entity directly responsible for economic development. And if you actually look at previous studies, the city of Vancouver actually spends the least in terms of economic development and economic investment in terms of attracting and growing local businesses, so that you really have businesses that are rooted here as opposed to flying in and flying out.
What do all these people have in common? Peter Ladner, Suzanne Hampton, Colleen Hardwick, everybody ran from council trying to unseat a mayor, and it didn't actually work very well. So I think part of what is trying to be created here from the ABC standpoint is Christine is going to be the one we run against. Even if one city runs on its own, or if it unites with other forces, the remnants of Forward Vancouver, whatever it is. I mean, there's an opportunity there to say, this is who I'm fighting in the next election. And when you define your rival this early, the chances are great for you.
You also have to remember the local labor council had also already decided that they were going to go with one city. So in one way, it was already lit up.
It's true.
The other municipality we're looking at is Surrey. And of course, in Surrey, the police debate endures. Still not over. We thought it would be by this time. Mayor Brenda Locke and her council are still sticking to their guns that they want the RCMP to stay, even though back in July, Mike Farnworth, the Solicitor General, ordered Surrey to begin to hurry up and transition to the Surrey Police Service. Here we are in October, still nothing definite, still a war of words between them both. Is the Surrey Police Service versus Surrey RCMP debate, which is costing taxpayers extra in Surrey, is that the equivalent of Vancouver's barge? Remember the barge that washed up a couple of years ago at Sunset Beach and seemed like it would never get taken apart? Eventually did, but it seemed like it just wouldn't and didn't get taken apart until after the election. is the Surrey police debate like the barge? Do you think that by the time we have our year-end panel, our scheduled year-end panel in December for the fourth quarter, do you think by then we'll actually have some momentum, or do you think it's going to be status quo, same as it is now, with no plan, no budget, and no cooperation between Surrey City Hall and the NDP?
It's probably one of the most expensive games of chicken that we've seen in politics in Canada. They're waiting for somebody to flinch. They're waiting for somebody to make the decision. The situation is more advantageous for the BC government, in my view, because they've already said that it's an issue that needs to be resolved locally. And it's always easier to appeal to the rest of the province and say, we don't want all of you to pay for Surrey's mess. So this is why we're going to leave it in the hands of Surrey. So it's not an easy situation for Brenda Locke. It wasn't an easy situation for any of her predecessors. But on this particular case, I just don't think she has surrounded herself with a team that has advised her well for what was to come. And this is what happens. You know, whoever told her that she had to go in there and look very angry and be very upset at the government for whatever it is they were doing did not do a good service and should not be providing any sort of advice to any elected politician.
Andy, do you think that there will be any momentum by the end of this year to fix this mess?
I think it's going to be an ongoing saga. It's really a game of chicken, as Mario has identified. And I think that it's really the ball is in the city of Surrey's court, because I think that she probably has the most to lose, I think, politically. I think that at the same time, one wonders what happens perhaps on the eve of a provincial election with so many seats being sat in Surrey, what will happen in terms of this debate. But then at the same time, you're talking about, one of the fastest growing municipalities in Canada, really some forthcoming elements in terms of a new SkyTrain route that's coming after the UBC routes, that I think that this is almost a distraction compared to all these other elements of really a very dynamic municipality in the region.
And that's where we'll end this edition of the MMA panel on the Breaker.news podcast. Me, Mackin, with Mario Canseco, the president of ResearchCo, and Andy Yan, the director of the city program at Simon Fraser University, rating and debating and talking about the politics, federal, provincial, and the two big cities here in British Columbia. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
It's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim.
In the Taiwan news, Taiwan crypto investor spends 2 new Taiwan dollars on fee, wins 10 million new Taiwan dollars receipt lottery jackpot. Lucky winner paid the equivalent of a 4-cent processing fee on Max Exchange owned by Taiwan's MyCoin. 10 million new Taiwan dollars is worth about $424,000 Canadian. Merchants in Taiwan issue a uniform receipt for goods and services that includes an 8-digit number. Every 2 months, a lottery occurs with cash prizes. In Kyoto news, number of foreign residents in Japan rises to record 3.2 million. By nationality, China has the most nationals in Japan, followed by Vietnam and South Korea. Significant increases were seen in the number of specified skilled workers who were immediately able to take on jobs in designated industries without the need for training, as well as trainees taking part in the country's technical internship program. In the Hong Kong Free Press, Hong Kong police take man aside after he displayed British colonial flag at football match. In response to HKFP, the police said in a statement that they identified a 21-year-old man who displayed a flag when police were maintaining order at the stadium. The colonial flag, emblazoned with the Union Jack and a dragon and lion motif, was adopted by the colonial government as Hong Kong's flag from 1959 to 1997, before the city was returned to China. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest.
In the Oregonian,
Oregon man who sexually exploited teenage girls in Canada gets 20 years in federal prison. Kevin Robert McCarty, a 37-year-old Happy Valley man, used social media to befriend teenage girls from Canada, convinced them to send him nude photos or videos of themselves, and used threats to extort them to share more. He was sentenced October 13th to 20 years in federal prison. The case was investigated by agents from Homeland Security Investigations in Portland after officers from Vancouver, BC sought their help in September 2021 with a child exploitation investigation involving 3 teenage girls in Canada. In King 5, investigators say fatigue and complacency were main causes of ferry collision into West Seattle Dock. Investigators said the captain did not recall what happened and seemed unaware of how the Washington State Ferry struck the dock. The collision caused over $10.3 million in damages. The Calumet Ferry collided with the Dolphin, a terminal structure that helps guide docking ferries, at the Fauntleroy Terminal in West Seattle on July 28, 2022. There were 94 people on board and 1 minor injury was reported. The ferry's crew safely offloaded all of the passengers. In the Times-Colonist, a shot of confusion. Some get flu-only bookings. Supply disparity means a wait for COVID shots. The Pharmacy Association said the COVID vaccine arrived later than hoped in all provinces, including BC, but that the Pfizer brand arrived this week and shipments to pharmacies are beginning. The association advised members to employ various strategies to avoid overbooking, including temporarily dropping COVID shots when it looks like those vaccine stocks are running low and providing flu shot-only appointments. That's Cascadia calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting.
Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to small business owners around British Columbia. The mom and pop shops, the dreamers and the doers on main streets and side streets in every community, big and small. It's Small Business Week in BC from October 15th to 21st. Spend your money at a small business this week and every week. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca.
These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men north of Richmond.
That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of October 15th, 2023. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 15th of October in 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the USSR, received the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in trying to thaw the Cold War and for opening up the Soviet Union? Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. The free email newsletter is the best way to keep up with the Breaker.news, while Facebook refuses to show Canadian news to Canadians because of the Trudeau Liberal government's Bill C-18. For news as it happens, you can follow the Breaker News on Twitter, and if you're outside of Canada, please visit the Breaker.news on Facebook. You can support the Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/thebreakernews. That's patreon.com/thebreakernews. Until next week.